I was in it was a sports club. I know it's hard to believe that I ever do sports, but I used to many years ago, last century, and I had a couple of non-Jewish friends there, and I said, listen, I can't come on, yes, I cannot come this week because I have Jewish New Year's Day. And they said, oh great, sounds like fun, New Year's. I said, actually we have 2 days of New Year's. He's like really impressed. Oh my God, you Jews have stamina. Like 2 days New Year's Eve, it's unbelievable. I said, actually, we spend most of the time praying in the synagogue. He said, yeah, right. I said, no, seriously, we spend like, let's say about 8 o'clock in the morning to like 2 in the afternoon praying in the synagogue, then we eat for 3 hours and we go back to the synagogue, right? Then we eat for another few hours, then we go to sleep, right? You go back to the synagogue, you eat for a few hours. It's like, he didn't believe anything I said, right? The only thing he believed was we have 2 days New Year's Eve, and he was very impressed by Judaism. Whether this counts as a Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, I'm not sure, right? But that's what he believed. So what I want to talk about a little bit is a shofar. Anyone been to Philadelphia? You've seen the Liberty Bell? You're familiar with the Liberty Bell? Right. What is written on the Liberty Bell? What does it say on the Liberty Bell? Oh gosh. You Americans? No, that's on the money.
I know they're worth this far, but I'm not sure.
Well, what it says is, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants thereof. I'm not sure what thereof means. Sounds like a swear word. Thereof, mate. Right, but anyway, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants thereof. And that is actually a verse from Leviticus, Vayikra 24. So it's a verse from Vayikra 24, but the context of the verse is nothing to do with ringing a bell. Right? Bells are not mentioned. Actually, bells are mentioned once in the Torah, but it's on the clothing of the priest. But when it says in Leviticus, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants, it refers to blowing the shofar. Every 50th year, called the Yovel, or the Jubilee year, the Jewish people, every city, you would blow the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur. In fact, today we have a custom, at the end of Yom Kippur, we blow shofar, right? The reason for that is not as a reminder to defrost the bagels or to start the microwave. Rather, the reason we blow the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur is to remind us of the Jubilee year when we blow the shofar on Yom Kippur back in biblical times in Israel. And it says, proclaim liberty, kratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. So, I'm not sure what people think about when you hear the shofar, but my guess is that most people don't think of freedom when they blow the shofar. But it's interesting to note that the biblical law, or the first relationship you have of shofar with anything in the Torah is actually with freedom. The only time it's mentioned in the Torah explicitly is the shofar and freedom. So I'd like to try to understand, we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, there must be some aspect of freedom. Is there some responsible adults who can actually take those children outside or something? It's really annoying. I have this at home all the time, but these are not my kids, so it's even more annoying. Anyway, you think you could? Yeah, thank you. Just slap them around a bit. That usually quiets them. Okay. Anyway, so the question is, what is the liberty aspect of the shofar? What is the freedom aspect of the shofar that we are experiencing, we're supposed to experience on Rosh Hashanah? So in order to understand this, I want to go back about 2,500 years to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. As you probably know, just to give you a timeline, Jews enter Israel 1313 BCE, that's the Middle Late Bronze Age Interchange period, MBI periods, archaeologists call it, under Joshua. We are chilling in Israel for approximately 400 years until the first kings. First king is King Saul, King David, followed by King Solomon, Shlomo, who builds that's right, the Beit HaMikdash, the first temple. First temple lasts for about 420 years. 420 years. About 420 years into the temple, the Babylonians invade Israel, and they destroy the Beit HaMikdash, destroy the temple, and they exile the Jews to Iraq. Baghdad is ancient Babylon, is modern-day Iraq. That is one of the oldest Jewish communities outside Israel today. It has now been transplanted to Deal, New Jersey, and to Flatbush. But one of the oldest Jewish communities outside Israel is indeed Iraq. So the Jewish people are in Babylon, in Iraq, and 70 years they're there for 70 years. After 70 years, Cyrus, who was the emperor, gives the Jews permission to return to Israel. So the Jews come back to the land of Israel and they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and they've rebuilt the walls. And then it says in the book of Nehemiah, it says, and all the people gathered at a square in front of the walls called Sha'ar Hamayim, which means water gate. Right? They gathered at this gate where they used to bring water into Jerusalem, and they're standing there, and it's the first day of the 7th month, which is Rosh Hashanah. So it's the first Rosh Hashanah in Israel after the Babylonian exile. They've just built the walls of the temple. The Jewish people are standing there, and they speak to Ezra and Nehemiah. They say, please read to us from the Torah. They want him to read to them from the Torah. Keep in mind that the Jews of Babylon assimilated very, very quickly. In 70 years, after 70 years, there were Jews who did not know any Hebrew, even though their families had come from Israel. There were Jews who had never seen a sukkah. There were Jews who had never heard the Torah. And there were many Jews who were married to non-Jews. And they, nevertheless, a few 100,000 of these Jews, ignorant and assimilated, nevertheless came back to Israel with Ezra and Nehemiah to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, which is an amazing thing. And they stand there and they say to Ezra, please read to us from the Torah of Moses. So Ezra takes out the Torah and he reads to the Jewish people. And it says he read to them from the morning till around noon. And people were breaking down crying. Why were they crying? The reason they were crying is very simple. They're listening to the Torah, and the Levites are explaining to them what the Torah expects of us, and they look at themselves and they see how far they are away from what the Torah expects, how distant they are from the ideal, and they start crying. Similar tears to the ones that I cry in gym when I look at the mirror. Right? And you see where you should be. Look at the poster of Jean-Claude Van Damme, and then you look at the mirror and you say... and you start crying, right? So, I mean, I'm joking because obviously I'm very close to that ideal, but nevertheless, but for the rest of you, right? So now, so the reason the Jews are crying is because they're hearing the Torah and they're seeing how far they are from what the Torah wants, and they're burst into tears. Now, imagine the scene. It's Rosh Hashanah. It is Jerusalem. It is after the Babylonian exile. The Jews are back, first Rosh Hashanah, in Jerusalem, in the rebuilt city. He's reading the Torah to them. It's a very emotional time, and they're crying. What do you think the reaction of most rabbis would be? You get up in synagogue, I speak in shuls, I get up in the synagogue, I give a sermon, and people burst into tears. What do you think my reaction would be? I'd be high-fiving the president of the synagogue. I'd be saying, this is fantastic! What else do you want? I mean, I'm a rabbi standing in shul, right? Normally the reaction to sermons is people, like that type of thing, or people are looking, they're not looking at their watches, they're doing this. The heck is it, right? I had a guy, I was giving a sermon, a guy walked out of my sermon, he came back, he had a haircut. I said, I don't believe it. You left in the middle of my sermon to get a haircut? He said at the beginning I didn't need one. So anyway, you can explain that to your friends afterwards. Obviously slow. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Right? So what happens is, right, if I were giving a sermon on Rosh Hashanah and people are crying, I would be extremely happy. There's nothing better. Instead, Ezra and Nehemiah, when the Jews start crying back then, Ezra and Nehemiah tell the Levites, the Leviim, they say, tell everyone to be quiet. Al tivku v'al titablu. Do not cry, do not mourn. Because today is holy unto God. Jews keep crying. He sends the Levium say, shut up, enough, no crying. They say, today is holy unto God, you're not supposed to cry. They say, L'chu ichlu mashmanim, go and eat good foods. Shtu mamtakim, drink wine, good wine. Right? And send presents to people who don't have anything. And rejoice. Very, very strange. And then it says that the Jews went home, they went, they ate, they drank. Asu simcha gedolah, they made a great festival of rejoicing because they understood what was said to them. So my question here is, what is going on? It's a little strange. It's understandably a very emotional time. It is understandable that they're crying because they're so distant from the Torah and they hear it being read, some of them for the first time ever. And they start crying. And Ezra tells them, stop, don't cry. Eat good food, drink good wine, send presents to each other, go and make a big simcha. And the Jews say, okay. And they went and they did it. And it says, because they understood what was said to them. I'm not sure what's the big deal about understanding what was said to them. There must be something going on in the subtext, in the undercurrents of the text, right? Which is not obvious, right? What is it they understood in the words of Ezra? And why is it that Ezra is insistent on them not crying and not mourning and celebrate, and instead they should celebrate and eat and drink? It's Rosh Hashanah after all. And indeed, we find that in halacha, Jewish law, we also do a little bit of both on Rosh Hashanah, don't we? We dress up in nice clothing. We eat good food. We have fantastic meals. You drink good wine. And we celebrate, like on most Yom Tovim. But on the other hand, there are elements of Rosh Hashanah which we don't, which are different. For example, every Yom Tov, every festival, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say a prayer called Hallel. There's a section of Tehillim Psalms which is very joyous and very happy, and it leads to singing and foot stomping if you're in the south, right? But basically, it is a very happy time, and it's a prayer that we say on every festival, except Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Even though they're festivals, we don't say that prayer. We don't say Hallel. So the question is, so we have actually a bit of a dual component. We have crying on the one hand, and we have laughter and happiness on the other hand. What is the meaning of it? So in order to understand this, we'll go back a little further than 2,500 years. We're going to go back approximately 14.3 billion years to where God is creating the human being. Or let's say 6,000, or whatever it is. Right? So God, the Midrash says the following. When God is about to create the human, by the way, Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of our creation, the creation of the human being. That's why existence, the license to exist, comes up for renewal. And if anyone has lived in Israel, you might know that driver's licenses, Israeli driver's license, you renew them on your birthday. That's when it's written. I don't know if it's like that in the States, I don't remember. Yeah. But it is like that. So it's wonderful. It's a great opportunity. This way you get to spend your birthday at the DMV. What better way to celebrate, right? And then for your wedding anniversary, you can go to the IRS, right? It's like, it's a great thing, right? You know, go to immigration maybe, even if you're an American. It's wonderful. So anyway, but the reason they do this is so you remember it. But Rosh Hashanah is our birthday, so to speak, the anniversary of the creation of the human being. And the Midrash tells us that there was an argument about the creation of man. The angel of truth said, don't create people. They are full of lies. They lie for no possible advantage. They lie when there is an advantage. People just lie. It's just a standard thing. Right? So the angel of truth says, don't create them. The angel of kindness says, create them. They do kindness. People give charity. People do acts of kindness. Today, I was trying to make a left-hand turn from a parking garage onto 34th. So it was not possible. There was just continuous line of traffic both ways. So I looked at, there was a guy, you know, the traffic had not yet started moving. There's a guy on the, travelling that way. I say, right, I just like begged him. He's like, please, you know, like, so, and he said, all right. And he actually let me in. This guy is guaranteed a good year. He is one of the righteous of the world, and he is guaranteed a place in the world to come. He's a New Yorker, and he let me in. He let me merge. He let me go in front of him. That means there were not 12,000 cars in front of him. There were 12,001 cars in front of him. It's an extraordinary act of self-sacrifice for a New Yorker. It's unbelievable, right? So the angel of kindness says, please, right, create them because they do acts of kindness. The angel of peace says, don't create them. They're full of wars and arguments. They are not creatures who are peaceful. Don't create them. And so what happens is, in the middle of this argument, God says, what do the words Na'aseh Adam mean? Na'aseh Adam. Literally, Na'aseh means, a little grammatical here, let us make man. The standard translation is, let us make man. However, it can be translated another way. The Midrash translates it in a different way. It says, while the angels were arguing, God comes in and he says, Kvar na'aseh Adam. Humans were already made. While you were arguing, I already did it. So the question here is, if you want to know the opinion of the angels, wait till they're finished before you create man. And if you don't care what the angels say, why have the argument? Why have the committee meeting? If we're having a meeting about something, in the middle of the meeting, I say, just a second, I just need to go out for a second. I go out, I come with my cell phone, make a phone call, come back in and say, listen, I already took care of it. I decided this. They said, what the heck? We're in the middle of a meeting. We're about to vote on it. I say, yeah, too bad. But why have the meeting? So what's the meaning of this debate of the angels if God is anyway creating the human being in the midst of it? And the answer is this. We were created in the midst of a debate because our existence is debatable. God specifically wanted to create us in the midst of an argument because our existence is arguable. Let me explain that a little further. Every creature in the world is necessary. Everything in the world is necessary. Worms are necessary. You need approximately 30,000 worms per acre of farmland to have nice fertile soil. It's a little disgusting to think of that, but you do need them, right? Worms are necessary, right? That aerates the soil, right, etc. Every creature is necessary. There's a lizard, right, in Indonesia, which is called the I forgot the name, the Kopak lizard. Kopak lizard. It eats coffee beans, and it doesn't digest them, and they come out. And when the coffee beans have gone through the digestive system of this Kopak lizard, right, they're meant to be really good coffee, and it costs like about $150 per pound for this coffee, right? Frankly, I would not be interested in coffee that has gone through the digestive system of a lizard, right? I certainly would not pay $30 a cup for it, but there are people who do, right? Every creature is necessary. Scorpions are necessary. In fact, Ben Gurion University in Becher recently synthesized from scorpion sting a drug for use in cancer. Right? So everything has a purpose. A wasp has a purpose as well. Someone has to live in Connecticut. Right? But every aspect of creation is there for a purpose. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Right? Do people have not enough caffeine today or something? I don't know. It just seems like everyone's like lethargic. Did you give out the Ritalin beforehand? You put it in the pizza? Right, okay, anyway. All right, maybe that's the answer. Anyway, so it works like this. So every creature in the world, in the ecosystem, is necessary. Plankton is there, is part of the food chains, part of the oxygen system. Everything's necessary. The only creature who we could do without or not is us, the human being. The human being can either be fulfill the purpose, or can choose not to. Every other creature has no choice but to do what it's supposed to do. Right? The whale will eat plankton. It doesn't really have a choice. Right? The shark will eat just about anything. It doesn't really have much of a choice. It will not change. It will not become a vegetarian. It will stay what it is. That's the way it goes. Right? Every animal, every creature in the planet must do what it's supposed to do. Has no choice. The only creature who's got the freedom to choose whether we will do what we're supposed to do or not is a human being. So therefore, we can either justify our existence, or our existence can be not justified. We can be, in the immortal words of John Cleese, a waste of space. Right? So that is a possibility. A person can choose to be a waste of space. Right? Rabbi Yonason Cleese is one of the founders of Monty Python. You've probably never heard of it. Doesn't matter. Americans never. It doesn't matter. Right. But the idea of the human being, we have that unique ability. So we were created, according to this midrash. Why did God create us in the middle of a debate? Because our very existence is indeed a debate. It's debatable whether we should exist, whether we can justify our existence, whether not. Right? Whether I can stand there and, in other words, and say, yep, I deserve to exist. Right? Or the opposite, God forbid. That is really the essence of the human being. As a great Hebrew poet said, I think it was Ibn Gvirol, Shlomo Ibn Gvirol. I'll say it in Hebrew because it's so beautiful, the words. But he says, Regel achat b'sh'ol tachtit, regel achat b'rekia shvi'it. The human being has one foot in the depths of hell, one foot in the seventh heaven. Right? Only that is a human being who can choose which foot to go on. But that's the freedom of choice which the human being is given, and which is what makes us similar to God, is that we can choose. We can choose. So that doesn't yet explain what the crying is about and what the laughter is about. What's happening in Ezra and Nehemiah. So I think the answer to this is the following. That when you think about this freedom of will, that freedom that we have is a double-edged sword. It can go either way. We have the ability to choose to do evil, which is way beyond anything that exists in the rest of the natural world. And we can also choose to do good, which is way beyond anything that exists in the natural world. Our choices, so to speak, are supernatural. It is to do good or the exact opposite. And that power is absolutely incredible. That power of the human being, but you see, you can only be someone who celebrates that freedom that we have if you are someone who can also cry about that freedom that we have. If you're not capable of crying about the tragedy of human free will, then you are not really someone who should be celebrating it. Does that make sense to you? No, what I'm saying is this. If a person can look at human free will and say, what's the big deal? It's fine. Right? Such a person shouldn't be celebrating. It's because the Jews cried when they heard the Torah and they realized what they'd done with their free will or what they had not done, and that's why they cried. That's why Ezra told them, now you can celebrate. Because now there's hope for you. Had they not cried, he wouldn't have told them to celebrate. You know why? Because there wouldn't have been hope. Only someone who's afraid, so to speak, of the power of free will is someone who I could trust with the free will power. For example, there was a student of Rabbi Hutner, of Yitzhak Hutner, a famous scholar who had a yeshiva, the yeshiva still exists, called Chaim Berlin, Yeshivat Chaim Berlin. He had a student there who was particularly brilliant, not related, but nevertheless, right? He was a particularly brilliant student, and he had a very good, he had very, very great talent for halacha. You know, he had a great talent for legal, Jewish legal issues, halacha. And Rav Hutner was encouraging him to be a posek, to become a halachic decisor. Right? That means like a rabbi who would render halachic decisions and really be up there like on a court. And this guy wanted to be an accountant. He said, look, you know, I've been in yeshiva a couple of years and I'm going to go do accountancy. Rav Hutner was encouraging him to do this. Anyway, finally he pulls the guy into his office and he says to him, why don't you want to paskin? Meaning, why don't you want to make these rulings in Jewish law? Why not? The guy said, why not? He said, I'm scared to make those type of decisions. So Rav Hutner said to him, and listen carefully, Rav Hutner said to him, when he said, I'm scared to make halachic decisions, Rav Hutner said, who do you think should make halachic decisions? Someone who's not scared? The person who's most qualified to make these decisions is someone who is scared about making these decisions. The guy who walks in and says, you know, if you're making a decision that will affect someone's life, someone's health, someone's marriage, someone's income, and you are not nervous about making such a decision, you should not be making such decisions. So Rav Hutner said the fact that you are nervous about it, the fact that you don't want to do it, the fact that you're scared, that's a prime qualification for making such decisions. I remember I learnt to drive when I was very old. I was like 30. Because I had left Australia when I was 17. So I couldn't get a license there. In Australia, you have to be 18 to get a license. I was living in Israel. So before I was married, living in Israel, I didn't really have an opportunity to get a car or to learn how to drive. So I didn't have a car. Right? I got married, didn't have money for a car at that time. Moved to Toronto. So in Toronto, I had to have a car. So I had to learn how to drive. So I got a driver's license. One of my students, a former student of mine in Israel, was a driving instructor. So he taught me how to drive. So anyway, he's telling me, he says, okay, we've got to go to the highway. I want you to floor the accelerator. And I said, what, are you kidding? He says, do what I say, just floor it. So anyway, he told me afterwards, he says, usually he teaches 18-year-olds. He says, much easier to teach someone who's 18 than to teach someone who's 30. I said, why is that? He said, because when I tell you to floor the accelerator, what's going through your mind is, oh my God, insurance and the wife and the kids and the job and the mortgage and the bills and the... And I was like, and he says, and the Verizon, then you know, in the car, and etc., etc. He says, I tell an 18-year-old, floor it. They'll say, yeah, big deal. Right? That's it. What the heck? I am immortal. Right? He says, it's easier to teach someone, right, when they're 18 because of the age of 8. Because these guys, at the age of 18, they have no fear. There's no nervousness, right? They're not thinking about the mortgage, the wife, the kids, nothing, right? So he says, therefore they do it. He says, you are a horror to teach. Now, thank God I drive well now, right? But nevertheless, I learned how to drive during snow in Toronto. So if you can drive during snow in Toronto on a shift, right, that's, you know, you can pretty much drive everywhere except Israel. Although it's interesting, my son, my second son is in the Israeli army, so he came back for 2 weeks for Pesach. So he got his license while he was here. But he never really had a chance to practice. The only practicing of driving he has done is on an armoured personnel carrier. So, which I said to him, this is perfect for New York, right? Come back, get a Hummer, right, and just drive it like it's an armoured personnel carrier, which a lot of people do, right? So anyway, but the fact is that being nervous about something is a qualification for doing it well. There was a survey done. My wife tells it she teaches psychology, so she told me that there was some survey which was over a few years of people's lives. They traced certain features of these people's lives, etc. So one of the questions they asked people was, if you would find $500 in a wallet on the street, would you return it to its owner? Or would you take the 500 and put the wallet in the garbage? So quite a few people said, yeah, I'd take the money. Like, duh, why would I return it? Right? There were some people who said, of course I'd return it. Think I'm a thief? Of course I'd return it. Right? And then there was another group, the third group of people said, it would be a challenge. You know, it would be challenging. I'm not sure. I'd probably return it. But I think it would be difficult. Right? When they traced the course of these people's lives, what they found is that when people were confronted with these type of situations, not necessarily finding $500 in the wallet, but they were confronted with situations like that, the people who were totally confident and said, of course I'd give it back, were the people who usually kept it. The people who said, of course I'd keep it, they kept it also. Right. But the people who said, not sure, it'd be a little difficult, but right, those were people who actually returned the money, or whatever the situation was. Because those are people who understood the danger of free will, and if you understand the danger of free will, then there's greater hope of you doing it correctly. This makes sense? So that's why on Rosh Hashanah, right, there is both celebration, there's a little bit of tears as well. We celebrate the greatness and the power of human free will, but we also cry a bit about what it can do. And by the way, it's not only, people often think of the power of humanity, we often think of the power of humanity. That means people as a whole. We rarely think of the power of each individual. Rosh Hashanah is a time also when we're supposed to think specifically about the power and the freedom of will of each individual. How do I know that? The Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah, Mishnah is the most ancient legal Jewish source, 170 CE, written in Sipori, the north of Israel, Yehuda Nasi, Judah the Prince. And the Mishnah says the following, that on Rosh Hashanah, everyone goes in front of God, Kivnei Meron. What does Bnei Meron mean? There are three explanations given in the Talmud. It says everyone passes before God like Bnei Meron. There are three explanations given in the Talmud for that. Number one, Bnei Meron, like sheep. When sheep are in the corral, or whatever they hold sheep in, the pen, right, and they come out of this gate, right, one sheep at a time comes out of the gate. And the farmer looks at the sheep and decides if it goes to the shearing shed or if it'll go through the golden arches or whatever it is, right? It makes a decision about the sheep, right? So it's one at a time. The other explanation is it's like Har Meron. There's a mountain in the north of Israel, which is a steep mountain. There's a path that goes up the mountain, which is only wide enough for one person at a time. If you try to pass on that path, someone will die. So it's only one person at a time. So again, this is the same path which is used today, and two Egged buses can go on this path in opposite directions, miraculously, and it's fine. Right? It's just that I don't know how it works. Everyone closes their eyes, including the drivers, and they just pass each other, and it works. But in ancient times, right, the path was only wide enough for one person. And so the emphasis there also is on each person, one person at a time. And the third explanation, Bnei Meron, means like Chayalotav Shel Beit David, the soldiers of King David's army. A soldier gets inspected by the sergeant. Anyone been in the army, you get inspected, right? The sergeant walks along and he inspects each one of you. Right, he takes your gun, makes sure it's clean, makes sure it's loaded, etc., etc., make sure it's in working condition. He makes sure you've got, water in your canteen, etc. I remember when I was in the Israeli army many years ago, right, the guys checking my canteen. Now, my wife, God bless her, had given me a special high-protein chocolate mixture, which you put into water, and it turns into a high-protein breakfast. So I had chocolate milk in my canteen, which I think is against regulations. But anyway, I'm getting inspected, and the guy pours out my canteen to see if it's full of water, and he says, Becher, maze, which means, what is this? I say, shoko, which means chocolate milk in Hebrew. So he shoves the canteen in my face, and he says, Ma katuv kan? Like, what does it say on the canteen? I said, well, I can't read it, it's a little close. He says, I'll tell you what it says on the canteen. Katuv kan mei shtiya bilvad, which means drinking water only. So he says, why do you think it says drinking water only? I said, maybe not everyone's wife is as loving as mine. Maybe not everyone can afford chocolate milk. Right? We want to be democratic here. Right? He says, no, Becher. The reason it says mei shtiya bilvad is because if, God forbid, you are wounded, we will use the contents of your canteen to clean the wound. He says, I do not know the effect of chocolate milk on an open wound. He says, I'm not a medic. He says, but I don't think it's the same as water. Right? Get rid of this and put water in the canteen. So anyway, you get inspected individually. So the idea of ki b'nei meron, that everyone passes before God like b'nei meron, either means like sheep individually, going up Mount Meron, the path, individually, inspected like soldiers individually. The emphasis here is each person is looked at individually. And you know why that is so? Because God created the human being as one individual. You think about it, philosophically speaking, could God have created 20 million people in one shot? Yeah. Of course. He could have created a million. Then, Adam, he sees the first sun's going down and says, I need a million. Right, there's only one person. Right, so he could have created 10. Right, why did he create the human being as one? So the Gemara, the Talmud says in Sanhedrin, the Talmud says, Lama nivra adam yechidi, why was the human created alone? Lamar lecha, to teach you. Shekola ma'abed nefesh echad, anyone who destroys a single soul is as though he's destroyed an entire world. Anyone who sustains a single soul is as though he's sustained an entire world. Because each person individually has to look upon themselves as though if I was the only human being, would God look at the angels and say, see, I was right? Or would the angels say, told you so? Right? Would the angel of truth said, yeah, look, yeah, see, tells truth. Would the angel of kindness said, see, I was right? Would the angel of awe, would they say, I was wrong? You shouldn't have listened to our advice. Right? Whatever. What's the story? In other words, as an individual. Because each one has the incredible power to affect the entire world. There's a museum that recently opened in London. It's the Winston Churchill Museum. It's a museum of Winston Churchill. There's a very large collection of single malt whiskies there and other things. Right? But in that museum, there was a pair of false teeth. And the curator of the museum pointed to the teeth and said to the reporter, she said, these are the teeth that save civilization. And the guy said, what? She said, yeah. These are the teeth that Churchill wore. They saved civilization. When Winston Churchill got up in Parliament and told and addressed the British people and said, we will fight on the beaches, we will fight on the landing strips, we will fight in the streets, we will fight in the air, we will fight on the water, we will never surrender. Right? And he encouraged people to, and he actually saved civilization. When Winston Churchill said in Parliament, he said, I offer you nothing but blood, sweat, toil and tears. Right? And when the German von Ribbentrop said that he's going to wring the neck of England like the neck of a chicken, and Churchill just got up and he said 4 words, and the whole country and the whole was totally, he said, some chicken, some neck. Right? And basically, right, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that those were the teeth that really, you could say, save civilization. And the acts, the words, the individual actions of each person has an impact which is way beyond what we can imagine. When that guy assassinated Grand Duke Ferdinand in Bosnia-Herzegovina, right, what did he start with that? Anyone know? World War I. Right? And not just World War I, but actually it was the result of World War I was also World War II, and so on and so forth. It's unbelievable. And it works on the evil side as well. Works on both ways. I remember I was in Vienna with a group of students, and we were standing there. The architecture in Vienna is absolutely magnificent, beautiful place. And we were standing there looking at this palace. It was one of the Habsburg Empire dynasty palaces. Magnificent, beautiful, and it looked kind of familiar to me. The balcony looked kind of familiar. And I asked the tour guide, I said, why does this balcony look familiar to me? He says, oh, yeah. He says, that's a famous balcony. He says, there's a famous picture of Hitler giving a speech on that balcony. Right? And all the crowds are cheering him, after the Germans were there, and he's talking about destroying the Jews, and they're all cheering. So the balcony didn't look so nice after that. Right? But again, I'm contrasting it, and I'm thinking to myself, Churchill's teeth, Hitler's mouth. And the power of the individual. So when you think of free will of each person and of all of humanity in those terms, we understand what was going on in the book of Nehemiah with the Jews. They started crying and they thought of free will. And Nehemiah and Ezra said, you're crying, now you can be happy. Because if you can cry about it, that means there's hope. You understand the depths and the responsibility and the power of that free will. That, I think, is the message of the shofar as well. The shofar, we blow the shofar, it's a shofar of freedom. In fact, the Sifrei, which is an ancient rabbinic commentary on the Torah, predates the Mishnah. The Sifrei says, Ein shofar elah cherut. The primary, in fact, a more correct translation would be, the only meaning of shofar is freedom. We blow the shofar, we're meant to think of that incredible power of human free will. And you'll note that there's two types of sounds the shofar produces. Two types of sounds. One is the long blowing sound called a tekiah, which goes something like, that type of thing, And the other type of sound is a crying sound. It's called shvarim, it's called truah. There's two different variations of it. It's either 9 sound like that, or like sobs, shvarim, right, or a combination of both, crying, sobbing, etc. So there's basically two types. There's tekiah, which is the triumphant blast, and then there is the crying blast. And when we blow the shofar, we always do. How do we always do it? What comes first? We always have tekiah first. Then it's followed by crying, the shvarim and the truah or the truah. And then what's it followed by? It is always followed by another tekiah. In other words, we start off by saying the human being is powerful, is great, and has this tremendous ability of free will. And then we think about that and we cry about that. But once we cry about that, now we're allowed to also be happy about it because we have the possibility and the hope of improving. This, I think, is why Jews don't seem to be too forgiving. You ever noticed? Anyone read the book Sunflower by Simon Wiesenthal? Anyone read the book Sunflower, Simon Wiesenthal? Anyone seen the movie? Played the video game? No. Okay. So Simon Wiesenthal wrote a book called The Sunflower. It's fantastic. We highly recommend it. It's not very long, right? And in the book, he says how he was in a concentration camp and he was taken with a group of Jews to a German army hospital to work in the hospital. So he's in the hospital working, which he was actually, pretty happy about because it was much better conditions than in the camp. And a nurse comes and says to him, Jew, come with me. She takes him into a room. There's a Nazi soldier who is wounded badly. He's lying there covered head to toe with bandages, groaning in pain, tubes all over the place, right? And he gestures, for Simon Wiesenthal to come over to him. So Wiesenthal comes over and he says, he bends down and the soldier tells him that he had volunteered for the SS when he was a teenager. Volunteered against the wishes of his parents, who were religious Christians and felt that it was wrong to join the Nazis. And he nevertheless did so. And he says, I was proud to be part of that. And he said, he went on to tell him all the crimes he did, the murder and the torture and everything, just horrific stuff. And at the end he says, now that I'm dying, I feel some regret for what I did. He says, you're Jewish, could you please forgive me? So he asked him. Simon Wiesenthal stands there quietly and walks out, doesn't say anything, doesn't forgive him. So that's the story that Simon Wiesenthal tells. And what's interesting is he asked other people what they thought. he went back to the camp, he asked other people who were discussing it, should I have forgiven him, should I have not? And then when he published the book, he asked great philosophers, thinkers, theologians, politicians, etc., to write little essays, short essays about what they would have said to the Nazi. It is an amazing thing to read. So, like Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa said, he says, I would have responded in the words of a famous rabbi who, when he was being killed by the Romans, said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. It's a quote from Jesus in the book of Luke. Right? And he says, you cannot move on without reconciliation and forgiveness. Of course, Bishop Desmond Tutu only believes that is true of other nations. He doesn't forgive Israel, but nevertheless. Right? And then he had Edmund Flannery, Catholic cardinal, who said, I can understand Simon Wiesenthal, but I cannot agree with him. And then you had, but it's interesting, if you read through all the responses, you know what you find? About 100% of the Christians said they'd forgive him. And about 100% of the Jews said they would not forgive him. Why is that so? Are we mean? Are we mean? Are we less forgiving? Why is it the Christians all... And it's not, you know... And some of these Christians, by the way, who said they forgive, were people who suffered under the Nazis. So it's not just a question of victim or not being a victim. And if you look, and this is an unscientific survey, but from my observation of the media, I see every now and again a story. In fact, Time had a long article about this. A story of people who forgive people who hurt them and their families. You ever seen those stories? Like there's some family in Iowa whose son was killed by a drunk driver, and they embraced the drunk driver and they argued with the parole board to get him out of prison, and they paid for his education and everything else, and they totally forgave him. And you don't really see much of that amongst Jews. So it's a little disturbing, right? I mean, are we really just mean and vengeful? Why is it that we don't seem to be as forgiving? And I think the answer is what I was talking about until now. The answer is this. It depends on your view of the greatness and the power of the human being. If you see the human being as basically born corrupt, as born with original sin, pathetic and wimp-like, unable to save themselves without someone dying for them and saving them, etc., right? Then if that's your view of the human being, then when a human does evil, are they totally to blame? Not really. It's what you expect. That's what a human is. Right? We are born with... That's the Christian view. A Christian view. Very common. We are born into original sin. We are born corrupt. We don't have a lot of power. And we don't even have the power to redeem ourselves. We need this guy to die on the cross for us. We only wish it was Mel who died on the cross. But anyway, but again, right, that's the situation. Right? Judaism, we look at the human being as born corrupt or pure? Pure. What do we say every morning? Elokai, my God. Neshama shenatata bi tahorahi. The soul you've placed within me is pure. Not corrupt, not tainted, not burdened with original sin. Right? And we say, how do we return to God? How do we correct what was in the past? Do we need someone to die? Do we need blood? Look in this week's parsha. It says explicitly, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha v'shamata l'kolo. Return to God, listen to His voice. B'chesed ve'emet yichupar avon. Kindness and peace, sin will be atoned for. No one has to die. No one has no blood, nothing. I remember I was in Hyde Park in London once. So Hyde Park in London, there's all these people. Anyone been to Hyde Park? There are lots of people standing up giving speeches there. It's like it's Speaker's Corner. So you get people standing on soap boxes, milk cartons, and giving speeches. And tourists, everyone comes there. People heckle, etc., etc. It's a lot of fun. Right? So most of the speeches are anti-Israel. Anyway, or anti-England. Right? So anyway, I'm standing there. There's someone speaking. It's a member of Jews for Jesus. So my wife and I, we'll go over there. And I say to my wife, I'd like to heckle. She says, oh, God, we have to do... I said, yeah, come on, it's going to be fun. So anyway, this guy's speaking. So he says, God needs blood and a sacrifice to forgive you for sin. So I said, excuse me? He said, yeah. I said, supposing, God forbid, I would hit you in the course of this, I wouldn't do this, but let's say we got really angry and I walk over and hit you. and then run away. And then, like 2 weeks later, you hear a knock on your door. You open the door, you don't see anyone, and I say, down here. And there I am, on my hands and knees. I crawled from Golders Green to wherever you live. Right? And I look up to you, tears of remorse in my eyes. I say, I am so sorry. Could you please forgive me? And, you know, you check out with your voice stress analyzer app, and you see that I'm not lying. Right? And you say, okay, so I said, would you forgive me, or would you ask for a bucket of my blood? And he said, what do you think? What type of creep do you think I am? I said, well, you think that about God. Right? Don't you think that about God? I said to you, would you forgive me if you saw that I was really remorseful? I asked you forgiveness, and I won't do it again. And you said you'd forgive me without blood. But you believe that God says not forgiveness without blood. I want blood! Right? I said, that's not a very nice way to look at God. We don't believe that God says that. Right? God doesn't need blood, doesn't want blood. Right? He wants a person to return to him. So I say, if you look, so we have two different views of the human being. One view of the human being is a pathetic, helpless, hopeless, corrupt, venal creature. Which I can name some people who are exactly that. However, in Judaism, right, in Judaism we look at the human being as powerful, as great, and as have the potential to be a little less than God. And we can actually save ourselves through tshuva, repentance, and through our actions, etc. Therefore, in Judaism, we are not so quick to forgive a Nazi. Because he hasn't shown remorse, he hasn't corrected what he's done, he hasn't made a commitment for the future, and what he did, the evil that he did, is real evil. And guess what? He did it because of his own free will. He can't blame it on Adam and Eve. He did it. Therefore, it's not because we're mean. It's because we see the human being as so great, and we have such high expectations that it's a heck of a lot harder to forgive. Is this clear? In parenting, it's the same thing. I remember when I shot a neighbour's window with a BB gun when I was a kid. So, not intentionally. Right? We were actually trying to shoot my friend's brother's toys, which we used as targets. And unfortunately, I missed and got the neighbour's living room window. So, now, my father is a good parent. A bad parent would have said, I'll come in and he sees I've broken the window, the neighbour phones and he says, your son's done this, right? And a bad parent, someone who's not good at parenting, would say, typical! Typical! Right? That's bad parenting. You know, why is that bad parenting?
Because you want to do more.
Exactly. Well, I'm saying typical. What I mean is that's typical of you because you are obviously evil, right? And you are bad. And this is the type of stuff I expect from an evil, bad kid like you. So he's creating the expectation of evil, if that's typical, right? Instead, my father, as a good parent, said, "I thought you were a better shot than that." Right? The heck, right? But anyway, but no, but the really good parent. So, and there's a difference. You know, if you look at the confession of sin, when we confess our sins on Yom Kippur, what we say is, what do we say? Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, which means the sin that I have sinned. If you look at Christian liturgy, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, in the Church of England prayer book, you look in the New Testament, etc., what you'll find is what they very often say is not I have sinned, but you know what they say? I am a sinner. What is the difference between saying I am a sinner and I have sinned?
Sinner, you're like always sin one time.
Exactly. A sinner is a description of who I am. That's it. So if I'm a sinner, that's how I'm born, that's what I am, then of course it's easy to forgive. But if I say I have sinned, that means I'm basically good, but I've done the wrong thing. And that's really interesting. And it's interesting, Rav Kook says that why is it that on Rosh Hashanah we do things a little out of order? When do we do three components of repentance? One is regret for the past and confession to God of that. And the third component is acceptance not to do it again. So, chronologically, what should you think you'd start the year with? What should be the first thing you do? Regret for the past. Instead, we start the year, we don't even talk about our sins. On Rosh Hashanah, we don't do any confession of sin whatsoever. We only do that on Yom Kippur, so it's out of order.
Yom Kippur first, then Rosh Hashanah.
Exactly. Exactly. Get rid of the past, the sins, and then start Rosh Hashanah. Rav Kook's answer to this is, but this is one answer, there's many answers, right? Rav Kook's answer is very, very beautiful. He says, we want to start the year with an emphasis not on the inability and the failure of my free will, but I want to start the year with a confidence in the greatness and power of my free will to do good. He says, if you start the year by saying, I did this wrong, I did that wrong, I'm pathetic, I'm loud, right, that's not a good way to start the year. Because that starts the year with hopelessness, that starts the year with pessimism, and that sets you up for failure. That's like starting the year by saying, typical. Typical. So we don't want to do that. Instead, we start the year by saying, I am able to declare God as king, which is what we do in our prayers. We say, I am capable of fixing the world. We are capable of doing amazing stuff. That's the greatness and the power of the human being. Yes, we cry about it a bit on Rosh Hashanah, the fact that we failed, but we don't talk about it explicitly. We want to start with the greatness, the power, and the tekiah, and then if we cry a little, that's okay. And then we do the tekiah again. And once it's safe, so to speak, once we've understood the power and the greatness and the good, then it's okay to focus a little bit, at least for a few days, on the negatives that we've done. But even when we do focus on the negatives, even when we say al khait, even when we say that, we still don't say I'm a sinner. All we say is I've sinned. Right? And that, I think, is the message of the shofar of Cherut. So, to get back to the beginning, the liberty bell. Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. They're off. So, when we talk about that, that's what shofar is supposed to remind us. It's supposed to remind us of the amazing power of bechira, of free will that each person has. Right? And actually, Maimonides says that the way in which we do teshuvah, in which we can improve ourselves, is we focus on the idea of bechira. Is we focus on the idea that everything should be, I should make decisions. I shouldn't abandon. A person who never makes a decision, a person who basically goes through life without really exerting their free will, is like the living dead, like a zombie. Like blood coming down the whole world, right? The night of the living dead, right? But that's really, unfortunately, what a lot of people do, right? They never really use the power of their free will. The Talmud says, if you see a bird hit the water, and you want to know, is this bird kosher or not? In other words, is it fatally injured, dead, right? Or is it okay, and it's worth it for me to go into the stream so I can have chicken tonight? What's the word, right? So there's a very easy test, pragmatic, simple test. If it's swimming against the current, faster than the current, or across the current, it's healthy. If it's flowing only with the current, it is basically fatally injured or dead. Don't bother with it. And that's not just a halachic legal concept, right, or medical concept in the laws of kashrut, it's a concept in life itself. If you are just going with the current, unfortunately, that's not a good sign. If you're going against the current, faster than the current, across the current, good sign. So that's one of the things, that's the lesson, I think, the primary, this might be a little different from what you've heard about Rosh Hashanah. Maybe not, maybe yes, right? But I think this is to me the central lesson of Rosh Hashanah. That I stand there in front of God as an individual, as if I was the only individual, and I have to say, have I justified my existence? Have I not? Can I justify my existence and have the confidence that I can do that, right? And to always keep in mind this incredible power that we have of this free will that we have. When we do that, then even though we cry a bit, but we can go, and as Ezra said, l'chu ichlu mashmanim, to go and eat fat foods, right? Shtu mamtakim, drink good wines, right? Shulchu manot le'nachon lo, to give presents to those who don't have, and should be simcha gdolah. So hopefully, when we approach Rosh Hashanah, yes, it's serious, it's a serious time, but there's also reason for happiness, and there's reason for rejoicing, and that's why we have things like apple dipped in honey, and that's why we eat foods which have got positive meaning to them. And by the way, there's a custom, I don't know if you've heard of this custom, a lot of people have a custom not to sleep during the day of Rosh Hashanah. Even though Shabbat and Yom Tov, it's customary, a lot of people sleep in the afternoon, right? So it's customary, but on Rosh Hashanah we don't do that. Why is that? Because when you're asleep, what's not working? Free will. Free will's not working, right? Your free will is not working when you're asleep. So to voluntarily put my free will into park on Rosh Hashanah, what is that? What type of sign is that for my year? It's not positive, right? I want to put my free will into drive, right? And I want to have my free will put the supercharger on the free will, right? And when we do that, hopefully we'll merit a happy and sweet new year. And I wish everyone to be signed and sealed in the book of life. And thank you very much for listening.
All right.
Questions?
First of all, don't leave quite yet. Rabbi Becher is going to be open to any questions, and also Rabbi Becher is an author of a very awesome book called
Gateway to Judaism.
Gateways to Judaism. Does anyone have that?
Yeah.
All right.
Almost there.
We have these books available. They usually cost $20 and plus in the store. We have them available at a special Emmett price of $12. So if anyone wants a book after the lecture, after the questions, come see me. We have a crate full of them. All right? We didn't discuss the price. You just told me to charge whatever I want.
Fine.
Are you still going to drive me home?
That's okay. Also, I'll just take this iPod as this looks like good. Nice. Okay.
Right, I'll get the books ready.
Okay, fine. Okay. Were there any questions? Yeah.
You said you should go against the current, right? So how do you sometimes go with the flow? Don't go with the flow.
I'm not sure what you mean. In other words, look, people often, what I mean by this is the following. People often just they just go into a default position of not making a decision. In other words, someone tells you, okay, you do this, so we'll do this, we'll go to college. After college, you get this job, and no one actually, instead of stepping back and saying, what do I want to be in life? How do I want to, not just what I want to be in the sense of how am I going to make a living in life, but what do I want to be in life? How's my life look? How will my home look? How will my family look? That type of decision is the type of thing we often just don't even do. We just like type of flow along and it falls into place. That's what I mean by that. Okay. Yes, question over here.
I didn't understand about forgiveness. You said you need to forgive, or you need to keep I didn't get it.
Well, the truth, because I didn't go into that. That's why you didn't get it, because I didn't go into it. But you're right. In other words, there is an obligation to be forgiving to people. If someone asks me for forgiveness, which we're supposed to do, right, during this time, right, I should try to be as forgiving as possible. In fact, every night when we go to sleep, there's a prayer that we say before Shema. We say Hareini Mochel. I forgive everyone who's angered me, who's hurt me, etc. I don't want anyone to be punished for me. However, there are certain things I can't forgive, and I'm not obligated to do. If someone did not ask for forgiveness, the Nazis, the Palestinians, right? Have they asked for forgiveness? Of course not. Yep. Have they demonstrated remorse? No. So I can't. And by the way, also in addition to which, I can't forgive you if you did something wrong to her. I can't. Right? The other person's got to forgive. I can't say, you know what? It's okay. You're forgiven. Right? True, you hurt him, but I forgive you. What do you mean I forgive you? Simon Wiesenthal, as Elie Wiesel's argument, he says, how can anyone, right, forgive the people he hurt? They're dead. He can't ask for forgiveness. So I'm not obligated to forgive absolute evil of that sort. Right? And there's a virtue in hating evil. It's okay to hate evil. Fantastic article by Meir Soloveichik in First Things, the Catholic Journal of Thought. He's a rabbi, has a fascinating article called The Virtue of Hatred. You can Google it, right? And it's a fascinating article about the subject. But when it comes to my friends' interpersonal relationships, we're not talking about absolute evil. We're talking about someone didn't give me a ride, or didn't lend me money, or didn't pay me back. That's a different story. I have to be forgiving. Now, I should be forgiving there. But we're talking about depths of evil, the depravity and evil. We're talking about, we're less forgiving about that. Yeah?
You say it's dangerous to have free will, right? How do you distinguish between having free will where you can use it to advantage or disadvantage?
I couldn't hear. How can you...
You said
it's dangerous. There's a danger in it, yeah.
How do you distinguish when it's dangerous and when it's not?
Well, it's...
Free will makes who we are?
Of course. I'm not saying it's not a good thing.
Right.
I'm saying it's a fantastic thing.
Right.
But it's a fantastic thing if it's used correctly.
How do you know?
Well, we have two ways of knowing it.
Besides the Torah.
Well, but why besides that?
No, I just want to know,
So I think
it takes time to get done.
I think a few things. Number one, we have the guidance of the Torah and the mitzvot. So there's certain absolute moral laws that give us guidance, number one. After a while, we have what's called also intuition. Now, and my intuition, right off the bat, not necessarily is it always right. But there's what Rav Shiller from Osmach calls tutored intuition. What I mean by that, what he means by that is tutored intuition means if I've studied enough of the Torah, if I've trained myself enough in the mitzvot, at a certain point in time, my intuition is pretty trustworthy. You can get to a point of maturity morally and ethically where you have got a pretty good intuition for what is appropriate, what is not. Not always can I do that. That's why it's always, there's nothing wrong with seeking advice from other people. We go to an elderly person, you ask for advice. You go to a wise person, you ask for advice. You go to friends. One of the reasons we have friends. Someone who can criticize me and say, you're an idiot, you're doing the wrong thing, and I won't get insulted. Because I know he's doing it because he loves me. So that's what a friend is for. Right? So primarily, one of the primary reasons is that a friend is someone, as how Rabbi Yonah puts it, a friend is someone who I can accept criticism from and he'll still be a friend. So that's important. So we have a number of ways of doing it. Those I would say, and you should use, there are books about it, but every advantage. Plato or Socrates, I think it was. Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. I don't know if I go that far, but nevertheless, I think to a certain degree he's right. An unexamined, when we talk about going with the flow, I think that's what Socrates meant by the unexamined life. I don't examine it, just do it. Right? No examination of it. Right? That's not good. Okay. Yes.
Question.
Over there, one. Yeah.
If you want to ask forgiveness of somebody who's passed on, you can't do it. Is there any?
Well, it's a little rough. There is actually a ceremony and a prayer that is said at the gravesite of someone who's passed away to ask for forgiveness. And you could, I assume, if you know a rabbi, pretty much your LOR should be able to help you with that. But there is actually a formula. It's not as good as when the person's alive, obviously, but I mean, it's something. You have to try to do that anyway. Yeah.
It's just very difficult to be a particular person's friend. Let's say you've tried being friends with for a long time, but for whatever reason it's just difficult for you to be in a relationship with that person. So you kind of tell them in like a very nice way that like you need the space and you don't really want to be their friend, so to speak, anymore. Would you have to ask them for forgiveness?
Well, I mean, if they didn't do anything wrong to you, I think it's a little, you can do the same thing without saying that. In other words, I think it would be, because a person can be sensitive about that. A person could be hurt by that. Right? So you don't want to hurt a person by that. You want to do it in such a way the person's not going to be hurt. Right? Yes, there's a question over there. Yeah.
There are certain sins, according to the Torah, for which you should be probably dead by now. How do you make correction of the sin?
Well, those are only if you have not repented. If a person has done teshuvah, doesn't apply.
You said like about God not wanting blood, what about like the korbanon and sacrifice of any kind of damage?
Well, it's a good point, but certainly there are obligations of various korbanot. But what I'm saying is they are not necessities for repentance and for atonement. How do I know that? Because in this week's parsha it says when the Jewish people are spread out amongst the nations and in exile, which means we don't have the temple and we don't have the sacrifices, the Torah says, "V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha," you shall return to the Lord your God and listen to His voice, and He will have mercy upon you returning to Israel. So one thing is very, very clear from the Torah itself, that there is a possibility of atonement even without the sacrifices. So I don't mean to say that there's never a case where God does not want a sacrifice, because clearly there are all the various commandments of the offerings and the sacrifice. What I'm saying is they're not an absolute requirement for atonement. It is possible to get atonement in ways other than that. Okay? One more question.
Business, right? It's very similar to the blood you were talking about. Why do you need to make a sacrifice, to be forgiven?
Well, it's not. Like I said, it's not an absolute necessity. The fact is we can be forgiven even without an offering. An offering is to help us. Why? How does it help me? Nachmanides says, right, when I see what is done to this animal, right, I say to myself, there, but for the grace of God goes I. So it's a very powerful psychological drama that is happening here. Right? And I put the blood on the altar, I say, you know what? This should be mine. Right? And when it's eaten, when it's burnt, I say, yeah, this should be me. The enormity of my... So it's a help. It's an aid. It's a psychological push to help me do tshuva. But in and of itself, it doesn't do it. In and of itself, it doesn't do it. And by the way, not all the sacrifices have got anything to do whatsoever with repentance. There are some of them for totally different reasons. Maimonides says some of them are there in order to unite the Jewish people in Jerusalem, eating together in a spirit of holiness and happiness, and to create a unity of the Jewish people. It's like the gigantic barbecue. Right? All the Jews come, right? Just chuck a cow on the barbie, mate. Right? Crack open a Foster's. Right? Throat's a dry lizard. Crack open a tinny, mate. Invite the Sheilas over. We'll have a barbecue. Right? So basically, you probably didn't understand anything I just said, but it doesn't matter. That's not important now. Right? The idea, Maimonides says, is that there's an idea of the unity and the happiness of the Jewish people getting together in these. So not all of them have got anything to do with it. Some of them are statements. You know, I take the god of the Egyptians, which they worship, the ram god, and I make god burgers out of it. Right? Basically, it's a way of saying that idolatry is a bunch of rubbish. Right? So there's different reasons for them. But again, what I'm saying, it's a minor point, but what I'm saying is it's not an absolute requirement for atonement. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And the books are being flogged over there, I believe. So.